It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. Now my wife has actually gone out for lunch today with my daughter, with the in-laws, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for me to be able to do a short, simple build. Or at least I hope it's going to be short and simple. When I say short, I mean my kind of short, not like a 3-4 minute kind of short. I know people tend to have a complaint sometimes that when I say quick, they think it's going to be only a couple of minutes, and of course it's like half an hour later. Anyway, what I am doing today is I'm going to be trying out for the first time to solder on Kailh Hotswap sockets. So let's have a look at what I've actually got that I'm playing with and my own PCB design. So this is, if I can get the camera to focus down on it, probably doesn't want to do that. Focus on my fingers. Yep, okay. So I designed back in April a very simple PCB, and it was just a 3x3 grid, kind of like a little mini numpad of sorts, with a Pro Micro basis. The initial thought and design behind this was for it to be a hot swappable system. Now I was able to, thanks to Mendez from Tay Keyboards, to get hold of some Kailh Hotswap sockets as well. So I had difficulties in actually getting a header system that I was happy with to go with this particular design concept, and so only for this particular one that I'm building, I'm actually just going to solder in the Pro Micro as per normal. It will not have solderless headers or hot swaps at all for the Pro Micro component. Now, I am aware that I can just get normal headers that will fit it, but typically if you have a look at, say, like the 40% Club and how they approach it, is they actually use diode legs to put them in as socketable Pro Micros. They don't use the header pins, the 254 pins that normally come with them, to actually fit. I did find people and suppliers that had headers that do work for them, but they increase the height massively. We're talking, you know, a good 5-6 millimeters, 8 millimeters of height, so the whole unit would be quite thick. I wanted to get away from that. You'll have to excuse the traffic happening in the background there, but they said that there is a possibility of much shorter, only 3 millimeter headers, but since then I've had radio silence from this particular supplier, so I don't know what's going on, and I just didn't want to wait. Now if I flip the PCB over, that's what I've actually got clamped in there ready to go, and you can see the actual footprint pattern for the PCB is very different to a standard PCB because it obviously has to accommodate these sockets. So the socket just sits into the actual hole like that, and they just fall in, and it's kind of like SMD'd soldered on. So it's the first time that I've ever tried doing this. I don't know how well it's going to go. We're just going to have to see, I guess. Now what I've got here on the table with me, of course, is my trusty TS100 soldering iron. You can see it's not heating at the moment, and I'm just using a regular B3 tip. I think that's what its number is, B2 or B3 tip, whatever it is that it comes with. I do have a finer tip, but I don't feel it's necessary for this because the actual channels on these are quite wide, so it should be fine. Of course, I've got, as I just shown, a bog standard Pro Micro. This is the black edition with the larger 32 U4 chipset on it, not the smaller one that's rotated 45 degrees. I've got a brass sponge to, of course, clean my soldering iron tip with, and I've just got some leaded solder here because over here, just off the screen there, I prefer to use leaded solder, and it's 0.7 millimeters because that's just my personal preference in size and diameter, and it seems to work pretty well for me. So let's turn this on. Let's get some heat into it. What have I got it set to? I've got it at 300, which is a good solid temperature. Just wait for that to heat up. Good thing about the actual TS100 is that it has a good ramp speed. Now I do have a very low voltage power supply for this. It's only a 12 volt, not a 24 volt. The heating ramp, when you have the 24 volt, goes up much quicker. It's, you know, it's like 11-14 seconds or something like that to heat it up at 12 volts, whereas it's only like 7 seconds or something to heat it up at 24. Not a big deal. I'm not doing a lot of large soldering jobs that needs that kind of heat ramp and availability of heat on the tip. So 12 volts perfectly fine. Of course, now I'm just going to clean that tip up and just get a bit of, just re-tin that, clean it up, and hopefully we're going to be good to go. Now I'm just going to do one to start with so I have an idea. Excuse the microphone bump if there's any noise. Alright, now I'm going to do this right hand side first because it's just easier. But let's see how that goes. Reflow that so it sits flat. Voila. That seems pretty good. The angle's a bit awkward like this, but just let that wick into the joint. And I think I'm going to burn myself here. Just make sure that's sitting flat. Just let that reflow. And I think that's it. Done. Now, just going to drop these other ones in. So I can do them all in one go. Very exciting. Now I did check out these Hotswap sockets ages ago, and they do actually hold a good amount of grip with how it works. I was shaking them upside down and they were barely coming out, and even with a very light drop test, they weren't popping out switches either. Now of course, if you drop your keyboard from an actual good height, you got other problems than just your switches coming out. But that said, if the switches carry the momentum and pop out, it's a good thing because it's kind of like sacrificing the momentum and energy from the drop into popping out switches rather than the shock of it staying within the whole keyboard and potentially causing other components to pop out and get damaged as well. So it's, you know, there's always a silver lining of sorts in these kinds of things. Now, I'm going to go and do the right hand side, I think, of these first, and it might just make it a little bit easier. Let that wick in, push, reflow it, let it cool down. Hold that down, make sure it's good. Wow, that was pretty quick, pretty painless, and they're pretty solid. Alright, so I'm just going to flip this around to make it easier. Probably don't need 4 of these alligators, but I wasn't 100% sure. Probably will need them in a second though when I'm doing the Pro Micro. Let's just go with 2. That should probably be more than enough. And let's do that again. Get that in. Woo! It's still hot. Let it flow in. Like that, just wicked right into it. It's pretty effortless. Wish all SMD components would be this smooth sailing. That said, I haven't really done much SMD components. This is only really the second time I've had to do any with SMD components. That said, if you put too much and it wicks quite far into this, I would imagine you're going to have difficulties desoldering it, and that first one's already been done. So I think we should be good. It looks pretty good. Now I have to flip that over. Let's just check how they look. Looks pretty good. Lots of little slots in there for my switches to go into. Of course, if I just grab a random switch that I've got here and I put them in, it holds it neatly, and you can see it ain't going anywhere, which is great. Right, so I want to put it this way, and then I can put my Pro Micro pins in. There's the Pro Micro itself. I want to put it in with the headers that way. And then I'm going to put my Pro Micro on top. Come on. There we go. Grab a roll of masking tape. Tape you down. Get it lined up on the pins so it's all good. Now in this context, it's not that big a deal, only because I don't have any switches underneath this. So it doesn't really matter if the pins and the Pro Micro aren't sitting absolutely flat and flush, because I don't actually have to take the Pro Micro off. Now, I forgot to mention that with these black ones, the actual silkscreen, so it says TX and RAW, the silkscreen is on the back. So TX is on this edge, or when flipped over, it's on this edge, and RAW, as it says up there, is on this edge, which of course is on that right hand side. So I just wanted to demonstrate that I am actually putting it in the right orientation, because I am paying attention to the markings that I put on the silkscreen. But it just might confuse some people who may have never seen the black edition of the Pro Micro, in that it doesn't have the silkscreen for its pin assignments on the top, but rather instead it's on the bottom. So let's just re-tape that so it has a chance of staying there. And then now I can flip that over, and I'll just do it this side. Three is more than enough. That one's going to get in the way. So let's just re-tin it again. And let's rock and roll. Oi. Actually, I'm just going to go from right to left. You'll notice I do like this little flicking action as I finish, and that's just how I wick any excess up, so I get really good peaks, as well as any excess comes off onto the tip of the iron with me. It's just, my own way of doing things. I haven't really watched any videos of soldering. I know that there's some good ones out there, like the one from Juju Cables. It's pretty good. And Tay Keyboards also has some videos on building keyboards that include soldering as well. And then there's also, I think, a video that's been referenced by some people from One Up Keyboards as well on soldering. I actually learnt to solder from my dad, who used to do lighting work. Electrical soldering for lighting, and you know, just very simple soldering using big fat fire sticks. So I kind of adopted my own style based off that and experience. My first keyboard that I ever built was a GH60 using that fire stick, and it turned out okay. It wasn't the cleanest and neatest of keyboard builds, but it did the job. As a matter of fact, it's the same keyboard that currently holds the prototype 3D printed set for the hub keycap profile that hopefully the Van Keyboards is going to be able to bring back very soon, very shortly. Now, as it is my habit to do, I'm just going to go back over them reflow to make sure I don't have any cold joints, and that just gives me some confidence in knowing that I've done them right. And I just love watching how the solder reflows and glistens and just goes all like liquidy metallic. It's very cool. And of course it allows me to just once again pull up any excess on the pin and joint that is completely unnecessary. It's very quick, only in that they're still quite hot by comparison to previously. And if it flows into the actual joint further and it shows that it needs more, then I can always add more to it as well. But generally I find I don't really have to. They still form nice sort of peaks. And if I have a little bit of excess on the actual tip itself that's been pulled from another pin, it'll naturally just wick it onto the pin if it needs it. Okay, there we go. So all of those are done. Very hot. We can now flip this and can feel the heat from all those pins still, and I want to just level it flat because last time I put a Pro Micro on, I had it at an angle and it actually caused the Pro Micro to lift a little bit. Not that it stopped it from working, it was just at a slight angle off the headers, that's all. So I want to make sure I get it flat-ish if I can. Okay, now let's see if I can get it to focus down. Do apologize if the focus isn't the greatest. I was actually trying to get a nicer webcam, the Logitech 4K Brio on Gumtree, which is like a local buy-sell kind of thing, and the guy who was selling it was actually fishing for a better price. They had it listed for a particular price, and I made, I said I'll take it at that price. Does that include shipping or not? Because the listing didn't say. And then they upped the price $10 and went, the offer is now at this. And I was like, what? They had the listing for 3 days and it obviously hadn't sold at that time frame. And now that they had somebody who was interested, they were playing the game. So I was like, all right, look, I'm still happy to get it at the increased price. Does that actually include shipping? And they still didn't respond, and then they jacked up the price again, and I went, no, that's it, I'm done. This guy's playing games, he's just trying to fish for a better price, and yeah. I said, no, fine, and then I reported the listing. Because if you're going to put a listed price, generally the make me an offer box is because it's people making you an offer lower, not so that you can rack your offers higher. So yeah, still not a better camera that has a better focus behind it, but you've probably seen me solder plenty of Pro Micros anyway, right? Well, and if you haven't, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. So you might wonder, well, I don't have a case or anything. There's no screw holes or mount holes for this. And you would be dead right, because I don't have a case designed for this yet. This is part of a project that I've been working on for work purposes, and part of that is I'm actually going to be designing and developing a case to go with this. Oh, why are you being difficult, pin? And yeah, I'll get that designed and printed using a 3D printer at work. Then I can mount this in it. I kind of have in mind that it's going to be a two-part case, a two-piece case, like a back piece and a front piece. The front piece will have switch holes in it, so of course you can push your switches through it. It will act as naturally like a plate, but the back of that front piece will have kind of indents so you can put in blockers. So because this is a hot swap system, doesn't mean you have to use all the switches. So if you don't want a 3x3 and you only want, say, you know, a 2x2 or an unusual layout that utilizes this, then what you can do is you can just insert the blockers. Open up the case, pop the blockers in where you don't want the switches, close up the case, and then you can push your switches through the front into the actual hot swap pins. So I couldn't really design the case until I had all the components put on it, so I knew what the heights and positions were. And while, yeah, I could have actually done it piecemeal and taped things down and stuff like that, I just find it's easier once you actually have it. And of course, with rapid prototyping, if I knocked up a design for the case and I got it printed, I wouldn't have to worry about soldering this together afterwards. I could just literally pop it in and see if it works. Away it goes. So yeah, that's why there's currently no case, and you're not going to see a case as part of today's build. Now, like I do with everything before, just on the other side, I'm just going to reflow these pins, and that way it'll also help remove any bridging between the pins. It is an issue for people who are not very experienced in soldering small pins in rows like this, and that you can quite often just get bridging. And it's the same technique I did on the other side. All I'm doing is just wicking up the actual pin, and what it'll do is it'll draw any excess solder up the pin and break any of those solder bridges that you may have accidentally formed between the pins. Now, I'm not actually going to trim these pins, only because I've done it before and it ends up looking really ugly for me because I don't do a good job of cutting them evenly and cleanly. I'd just rather leave them full length, and it's actually structurally stronger for my purposes in designing a case because the pins act as kind of like a rack barrier to stop anything from hitting the components on the actual Pro Micro itself. So there you have it. My hot swap is done. Pro Microed. Now you might say, why are you using such a big empty space? Why isn't it actually mounted further down? And the reason is it doesn't work with these hot swaps. The hot swaps actually get in the way in that there's not enough space between the Pro Micro. Unless if you do like something really weird, because I tried all sorts of orientations when I was in KiCad, and I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to have a little bit of a header space on it, and it's not a problem. And for future designs, I can actually put like a reset switch or other components here, even maybe like a light, and yeah, it's no big deal. The extra sort of switch height row, heck, you could even put an extra switch in here if you really wanted to and turn it into a 10, but for the moment it's just staying as it is, a 9 key pad. Rightio, so that is my 3x3 Kailh Hotswap driven macro pad. Now, of course, I have to make sure that I do the right thing and maintain my iron, so I'm just cleaning the tip. I'm pulling the power supply out, so it's going to start cooling down very quickly. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually using the residual heat to coat the tip with some solder, and it's just going to form a ball at the end of the tip here. It's smoking away off camera here, so that it will actually protect the tip from corrosion and oxidation. So when I reheat that tip later on to use it, it is going to just soften up that solder and drop away, and I can clean it off and away I go. So yeah, just going to wait a little while for that. Going to gently transfer hands because it takes ages for that blob to cool down and solidify. As long as there's enough that covers the tip. Yeah, it looks like it. Alright, so I want to say thank you, of course, for checking out the video. Really appreciate it. I say thank you for everyone who's been supporting the channel. Really appreciate that as well. We are kind of coming up to about the 2,000 subscribers mark at the point that I've made this video. Of course, by the time I release this video, we might be over it. I don't know. If we haven't hit that yet, don't forget, at 2,000 subscribers, I will be doing a giveaway for some Cos Cap artisans, courtesy of Cos and Jolly Green Giant on Reddit as well. Much appreciated. Thank you for the love. If you've somehow come across this video and you're not aware, we have a podcast series, which is of course called The Board Podcast. You can find it at www.theboardpodcast.com. You can find us on Reddit, Facebook as well, and we also have a Patreon if you'd like to come by and show us some love and support so we can continue to create, develop, make, all sorts of stuff related to mechanical keyboards. Is that good now? So there we go. So you can see there's that bulbous point of solder that's just hanging around the tip of my soldering iron, which is still very, very hot, so I'm not going to go and touch it. Just rest that. Rightio, thanks very much. If you like this kind of stuff, please hit the like button. Just, give it that little click. It'll help us. It'll increase visibility of all my videos. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Also, love to get that support from you. Right, that's it. I'm going to wrap it. And look, it's even shorter than half an hour. Half an hour for building a macro pad. That is like almost a speed record for me. How cool is that? Well, thanks for coming along. And, of course, until next time, happy clacking.